My name is Dan Allen. I'm Vice President for Advancement at DePaul. And I'm not entirely sure everyone we have on with us this evening, but I'm hopeful that some of you I met when I was in China this past fall with Dr. and Mrs. Esteban and Professor Wei for alumni events when we were there. So it's a pleasure to see you again. And if you are on, and for those who I'm meeting for the first time, thank you for joining us. And most importantly, let me offer my words of hope that all of you are staying safe and healthy, and that your families and loved ones are all safe and healthy as well. And another word of thanks for the outpouring of support that many of you have offered for the university and our students. We recognize it's a challenging time for folks all across the world. And it's particularly heartening to know that our alumni are keeping in mind what we're doing at the university and the struggles particularly that our students are having. And so we thank you for reaching out, and we hope this evening for you is an opportunity for you to reconnect with reconnect a little bit with DePaul, and to most importantly hear from one of our faculty experts regarding how this pandemic is affecting the global supply chain. So our program today is going to include a welcome from Dr. and Mrs. Esteban. Dr. Esteban is president of the university, and his wife, Jo, is a crucial partner in the work that we're doing at DePaul. And following our welcome from Dr. and Mrs. Esteban, we're going to hear from Professor Nezih Altay regarding the effects of the pandemic on the global supply chain. And following Nezih's remarks, our colleague Jean-Mario Bassano from Global Engagement Office is going to conclude the program. And so again, a welcome to our alumni and to admitted students who are joining us as well. And without further ado, I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. and Mrs. Esteban to offer an official welcome from the university. Dr. and Mrs. Esteban, please.
Ni hao. Joe and I are happy to join you in this online space, although we do look forward to the next time we will be able to see you in person.
Absolutely. We very much enjoyed our trip to China last year. The best part, of course, was getting to know so many of our DePaul alumni.
We both miss visiting with DePaul alumni around the world. In the meantime, we're grateful that technology allows us to stay connected, and we're very happy to see so many of you attending today's discussion with Professor Altay. As an expert in global supply chains, I understand he has been very busy lately responding to requests from the media. Thank you, Professor Altay, for sharing your expertise with us today. The COVID-19 global pandemic has created a time like no other in DePaul's history. The DePaul community needed to pivot, and this spring quarter, our faculty transitioned in less than 2 weeks to teach more than 4,000 classes online. Our faculty and staff rose to the challenge to provide our students with access to a learning environment grounded in our Vincentian values. I appreciate and I am extremely grateful for all their efforts. Over the past 2 months and moving forward, we have been guided by the goal of providing a safe and healthy environment for our students to learn, and for our faculty and staff to serve our students. We will not waver from this commitment. Looking ahead, DePaul plans to be open for limited in-person learning this fall quarter. We are planning to offer select courses in a face-to-face setting, but we do not believe we will be able to go back to fully face-to-face classes as they were before. We are working closely with all units across campus to provide a detailed plan. In addition to determining which classes could be in person, the university is also working to update more than 100 classrooms with Zoom functionality, allowing participation for students who cannot join on campus. We also are continuing to communicate closely with our international students, both abroad and already living in the US, to offer as much support as possible. Special arrangements are being made for international students who are unable to complete in-person degrees due to visa restrictions. The new DePaul experience will look different from what our alumni remember, but the knowledge and values that accompany a DePaul education will not. The world needs DePaul graduates more than ever right now.
Throughout this crisis, Gabe and I have been very grateful for the continued support of DePaul's alumni and friends. Our alumni have demonstrated their generosity by supporting the campaigns on the Inspire DePaul crowdfunding site, such as the Student Emergency Assistance Fund and the Student Food Pantry. From meals to technology needs, these gifts are helping students who are facing financial hardships due to the pandemic. We can't say enough how much we appreciate our alumni.
COVID-19 has affected members of the DePaul community near and far. This virus does not discriminate based on race, age, gender, or location. We stand together as a Catholic Vincentian community that values human dignity.
We continue to pray for an end to this pandemic and for the health and safety of us all.
We hope you and your families are staying safe and healthy. Thank you. I'll now turn the program back to Professor Altay.
Thank you, Dr. Esteban and Ms. Esteban, for your kind words. My name is Nezih Altay, and I'm the faculty director of the Master of Supply Chain Management program at DePaul. And my research is humanitarian supply chains and supply chain disruptions. So as you can imagine, that this COVID-19 is a live, ongoing case for my research, and it's been really busy since about March. So without further ado, I would like to switch to the presentation. And what I'd like to talk about today in about 30 minutes, I'd like to give you the basics of why COVID-19 is has such a big impact on supply chains, global supply chains. Why is it different? And also a primer on supply chain resilience and business continuity. So resilience, let me first explain what resilience is. Resilience, the way we define it, is the ability of a company or a person to get back up and come back to normalcy in a short time. So a company experiencing a supply chain disruption will lose either supply capacity or they may have demand issues. Resilience basically tells us how fast they can get up to their old normal. So here's a basic view of supply chains for those of you who don't have a supply chain background. Supply chain management basically is matching supply with demand. So as a mathematical equation, it's very simply demand equals supply. So if I have two markets, one market is a demand sink for product X, whatever X is. Let's talk about ventilators, cars, iPhones or cell phones, right? And for that X product, let's say demand is 100, and it usually varies about, between plus and minus 10. The variation plus and minus 10, we call it normal variation. Basically, demand fluctuates in normal times for random reasons. So let's just talk about, let's just think that, the product X, the demand for it can be 90 or 110, okay? Just a simple number. The other market is for product Y. It's a different product, and it has a different demand structure. So we have basically two supply chains on this slide. One is for product X, the other one is for product Y. And the supply, there's only one box there, but it doesn't mean that, you know, one company supplies one company. This is a network of companies, and I oversimplified it in one box saying supply of X, but supply of X can be almost like a spider web if you think about it. And usually these supplies are about to be about the same level with the demand, because in efficient markets, supply and demand actually come to an equilibrium. So if demand is 100, supply should be 100. If demand goes up to 200, then there will be popping new companies that actually start producing that product, and then eventually demand and supply will match again. So that's why we expect in the X supply chain, the total capacity or total supply to be about to be same with the total demand. So if demand, the base demand is 100, capacity is 100, and then you have some stock, safety stock, for example, that will take care of the fluctuations. So in a regular supply chain, in normal times, in status quo, this will be what you have. And we talk about supply chain disruptions a lot. So how is a supply chain disruption different? What happens when a disruption hits? Usually, when we talk about supply chain disruptions, we always focus on the supply side. It's a supply disruption. So what happens is one of these supply chains will be disrupted due to any reason. It could be that there is an earthquake in the factory, in the country where the factory is located, or there is flooding, or in Michigan, for example, we have a dam break that happened recently. It could be a hurricane. India and is it the Philippines that, you know, they're dealing with a typhoon right now. So it could be a natural disaster. It could be a worker union going to, you know, strike. It could be a port strike. So the factory produces stuff, but they cannot ship out because the port is closed. So anything that disrupts the movement of supply from the left-hand side of that slide to the right-hand side, in other words, from upstream to downstream in the supply chain, is called a supply disruption. So when supply capacity goes down, let me use a laser pointer. When the supply capacity goes down, what I do is I use the stock that I have to satisfy this demand. So I basically move the stock immediately. While I'm actually depleting the stock, while the market is absorbing the stock, I get time, I have time to build up this capacity, okay? Whatever it is needed. Maybe it's repairs, maybe it's negotiations with the unions. Whatever the disruption is, you gain time to fix it. What happens when a demand peak hits a supply chain? So that's a less frequent occasion. When a demand peak happens, for whatever reason, I do the same thing actually. So if you remember, this demand used to be 70 plus minus 10. Let's say it goes to 90, which is basically more than the expected variation, more than 10, right? So again, what I would do is I would move the stock that is in the system into the market. And in the meantime, I will decide whether to increase my capacity. And why would I do that? If I feel that the demand of 90 is here to stay, then I would increase the capacity. Efficient market idea, right? So if demand goes up, I would increase my capacity. However, if I feel that this demand is temporary, then I won't do anything because I know it's going to come down to regular levels, and I would just satisfy it with the stock and absorb some lost sales. What's different with COVID-19 is very, very interesting. This is something that we have not experienced before. So in COVID-19, we're still looking at the same supply chains of two different products. However, what happened is in one product, demand disappeared. So demand in this picture, you can tell, went 50% down. So from 70 to 35. 50% of the customers disappeared. What does that mean? We moved homes. We are in lockdowns. We're not out there in the malls and supermarkets shopping. So some of the things we can get delivered like food, but nobody's buying ties right now. So demand disappeared. And can I ship the inventory? There's no point because there's no demand. Should I increase the capacity? There's no point because there's no demand. So if the markets are efficient, when demand disappeared, if demand stays that way, some companies will disappear. They will close down so that the demand and supply again balances. Now, what we don't know, how long this low demand will stay around. If it's a temporary thing, these companies that have financial strengths, financial health, will survive until demand comes back up again. But as you know, if you're reading the news, everybody's talking about the new normal. If the new normal is that the demand that used to be 70 will be now 50, then we will see that efficient markets catching up with it and some of the companies disappearing. You already probably saw on the news that J. Crew has filed a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Neiman Marcus filed bankruptcy. Hertz Rent-A-Car filed bankruptcy. So we're already seeing the impacts of this low demand or disappearing demand situation. But COVID-19 doesn't stop there. It actually throws another curveball. For some products, demand tripled, quadrupled. So it's not a demand peak, it's further than that. What are those products? Toilet paper. When everyone is buying, let's say 4 or 5 rolls of toilet paper a week, people went into a frenzy, into a panic state, and they started buying hundreds of rolls. So in other words, they bought 5 times, 6 times more than their regular demand of toilet paper. Ventilators, demand for ventilators went up. So suddenly we have a huge demand for that product, whatever that product X is, whether it's toilet paper or ventilators, and the capacity in the marketplace is still the same. So that's why you see companies like Ford, or in Turkey, for example, there's a company called Arçelik. Arçelik is a white goods company. They make ovens and dishwashers and refrigerators. So Ford makes cars, and they all switched to make ventilators simply because we don't have enough capacity in the system. So some of the other supply chains, supply chain Z, supply chain ABC, they're actually switching to product X to satisfy this demand. But COVID-19 didn't even stop there. So one other thing happened. With all these people, everyone getting sick and infected, some of the supply side lost capacity, meaning some of the factories closed their doors because more than half of their employees are COVID infected. That is why, for example, in the United States, we're experiencing a meat shortage right now because the meat processing companies, several meat processing companies have been identified with COVID infection, and they closed doors, they closed their factories, meaning we have a supply loss. Those factories are not producing right now. So not only you have incredible demand on one side, loss of demand on the other side, and also loss of capacity. And as far as I know, in the history of supply chain disruption research, we have never seen all 3 of these things happening at the same time within the same event. There is another layer to COVID-19. Supply chain disruptions like earthquakes are local. So if an earthquake hits Turkey, it affects supply or supply capacity in Turkey only. There's a ripple effect because Turkish company probably supplies another company in China, and the Chinese company supplies another company in the United States. There's a ripple effect, yes, but it only impacts the company located in Turkey. If there's flooding in India, let's say South India, it only impacts the companies located in South India. However, COVID-19 is global. That's why we call it a pandemic. And it impacts companies all around the world. So it just doesn't impact one company in one location in terms of supply, or one company in one location in terms of demand, but it's a global demand and it's a global supply. Several companies in different countries in the same supply chain producing the same product are impacted. So the effect of this on global supply chains is tremendous. It's basically chaos right now. So how can we protect ourselves for the next pandemic or for the next disruption that we may experience? There is a lot of research on supply chain disruptions and resilience, supply chain resilience. So I'm going to share with you the basics. And we can talk about two different strategies in terms of supply chain disruption. One is reactive strategies. So if you read in the newspapers, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, or even the literature, you will realize that people talk about agility, responsiveness, flexibility. These are all reactive strategies, meaning that, you know, when some disruption happens, you actually react to it. You're agile, meaning you can move around, you can change things really fast, you're very flexible. So these are reactive strategies. I'm going to also talk about proactive strategies, like mitigation strategies. What can you do now to prepare your company for the next event? So we will look at supply side and this demand side of these strategies. In the supply side, when a disruption happens, depending on the nature of the disruption, whether it's destruction like earthquake, or actually a business disruption like a labor strike, we obviously take different type of action. So I listed on the slide general actions for any disruption. So for example, when a supply side disruption happens, obviously our first reaction is to increase supply, because supply side disruption means that you lost some capacity to produce. So I need to increase that capacity. How can I do that? I can bring in overtime labor, so work faster, work more, or I can subcontract some of the capacity, meaning I outsource some of the capacity. So these are very standard responses. Or I can, what we call coping, I can reduce variety of the product offerings that I have. Let's say as a company, we're offering 100 different products, but during a coping time or coping period, I will reduce that variety to maybe 10 or 20 so that I can focus only on those items and use my reduced capacity to produce those items. So for this is temporary, right? So for a short time, basically I will reduce my product mix offering. Or I can reduce quality expectations. So instead of doing extensive inspections and quality checks and all that stuff, to save time and to produce more, to increase capacity, I can get rid of those quality inspections for a temporary time period again, and ship out products immediately. I can move production to a different location. If my location has been impacted because of flooding, typhoons, hurricanes, earthquakes, whatever, I can move the production to another country, another region in the country, or I can change my production process. Obviously, this every point of that I'm listing here does not match or meet with every situation, meet the demands of every situation. For example, in chemical processes, in the chemical industry, usually there is one process that everyone uses to produce a certain chemical, so it's not easy to change that production process. However, if we're talking about textiles, if your machines broke down, you can still continue producing textiles probably manually or using lower technology. Instead of robotic sewing machines, you can use human sewing machines, human-operated sewing machines. So you can change the process, but still produce the same product. You can switch to an alternative facility. If your factory is affected, you can move your machines into a warehouse and make a makeshift factory. You can find alternate suppliers. If your suppliers are affected, maybe your factory or your production your company is not affected, but your suppliers are, you can find alternate suppliers. Now you understand that this is a reactive strategy. So basically, in a dire time, if you start searching for suppliers, your raw materials or the products that you're buying from your suppliers will be a lot more expensive because they're going to sense the shortage in the market and up the price. But again, it's temporary. So that's why we call this coping mechanisms. And ultimately, if the disruption is in the transport, is in the logistics side of your business, meaning a port closure or a road closure, bridge collapse, things like that, you find alternative routes, or even you find alternative transport. For example, if the ports are closed, you cannot load your containers into a ship. So maybe you can actually ship them out with airplanes, which is much more expensive but temporary. Or you can find routes over the land and load everything onto trucks and trains and all that stuff and ship around. So these are reactive strategies on the supply side. On the demand side, if we have a demand peak, how do I react to it? Well, I need to find ways. Remember, in COVID-19, we talk about managing the curve. That's what we do over here too. If we have a demand peak, we're trying to spread that demand out. How do I do that? I can take reservations. For example, a restaurant, typical idea, a restaurant with 10 tables has 20 people who wants to eat there. Well, I only have 10 tables. So one way to do that is to allow everyone to sit only for, let's say, 2 hours for dinner. That way I can turn around the tables, or I can take reservations and spread the demand into multiple days. So taking reservations, scheduling your customers, queuing your customers, these are all demand side reactive strategies. If I have a supply side shortage, but also on the demand there is a movement, a increase, what I can do is I can prioritize my high margin customers. So here, of course, I'm assuming that you already have a classification of your customers based on their potential value and potential revenue value or revenue potential and volume. So based on that, you actually prioritize your high margin customers, and if there's any leftover capacity, you serve your other customers. You can switch distribution channels. We're seeing this actually happening a lot in the grocery industry here, food industry, because I think since mid-March, my wife and I haven't been to a grocery store, to a supermarket to shop. We actually order everything from Amazon or other delivery apps, and we get food delivered, grocery supplies delivered to our door. So for those companies, the distribution channel shifted. So they used to sell stuff from stores. Now they're delivering. I have a close friend in Turkey who has a mussel farm, and he grows mussels in the sea. And he used to be a wholesaler and sell mussels in high amounts, large amounts, to distributors and restaurants. And restaurants are closed. So, and his mussels need to be harvested. Otherwise, they actually leave the farm, so he loses product. So he's immediately, he started immediately changing his distribution channel and changing his business model from a wholesaler selling to restaurants and distributors to a retailer shipping mussels directly to your door. So they ice them, small packages, and ship them to houses. That's the idea in switching distribution channels. Or you can find new customers for your product. If in one market your demand disappeared, you can always find another market for your products. So these are all, as I said, reactive strategies. And next I want to talk about proactive strategies, meaning mitigation strategies. What can we do to prepare now for the next pandemic, for the next epidemic, for the next disruption? Again, I'm going to separate it into supply side strategies and demand side strategies. In the supply side, every company needs to have a risk management strategy. This may be, to you, it may be sounding like, duh, of course, you know, why are we even talking about this? However, there's a report published in 2017, I believe, by, if I'm not mistaken, it was KPMG. And they interviewed hundreds of CEOs, and they asked them, what type of risk management strategy do you have? Close to 20% of the CEOs said they don't have any risk management strategy. So not every company has a risk management strategy. Even think about yourselves. As a family, as an individual, do you have a risk management strategy? Do you have a strategy that says, okay, if this happens, this is my game plan. If that happens, this is my game plan. Most of us, with the brouhaha of the daily business, of daily life, forget about creating risk management strategies. So first, you have to have a risk management strategy. Second, invest in transparency. If there's one thing that works in terms of supply chain resilience, that is end-to-end visibility in your supply chain. Well, how do you create end-to-end visibility in your supply chain? Is through technology, so that my software can talk to your software. For example, my ERP system talks to your ERP system, and we can see each other's inventory levels. We can see each other's plans in terms of capacity increases or decreases. But technology doesn't solve every problem. You need relationships. So investing in transparency is also investing into people in your supply chain. Invest in your suppliers, invest in your customers, invest your time in them to build good relationships. Talk to them. Invest in horizontal collaborations. So vertical collaborations means that a company collaborating or partnering with a supplier or a customer. When we talk about horizontal collaborations, it's basically collaboration with, or partnering with your competitors. So Toyota partnering with Honda, that would be a horizontal collaboration. A good example is actually Subaru partnering with Toyota and Scion. And in one factory, Subaru is producing the sports car. I think it's called RBZ. And Scion has the same car, and it's produced in the same factory, same engine and everything. And Toyota has, I think it's called 86 or something. I'm not a big car person. But all three cars are produced in the same factory. That's a typical horizontal partnership or horizontal collaboration. So partner with your competitors. During the status quo normal times, you can still compete. But when a disruption like COVID-19 happens, you need to actually join hands because together you can only beat this. Shorten your supply chain. Our supply chains are way too complex with too many middle people. Too many brokers, too many forwarders, too many middlemen, distributors, wholesalers. There's a country distributor, and then there's a regional distributor, a state distributor. So shorten your supply chains. Be more direct. And one of the reasons of shortening your supply chain is also shorter supply chains have less lead time. And lead time is one of the issues that makes supply chain management very difficult. Because if for example, if the lead time of producing this tie is about 6 months from design to sourcing of the materials, making the tie, and packaging it, shipping it, inventorying it, and all that stuff takes 6 months. Well, by the time I decide to make a light blue tie, maybe 6 months later, the fashion will be orange ties. So for me, it's very hard to respond to that change in demand because my lead time is 6 months. So if I can actually shorten my supply chains, shorten my processes, and bring it down to 2 months or 3 times, I can respond it faster. Build ecosystem intelligence. So in the previous slide, in the reactive strategy, I mentioned that you can always find a new supplier. The product will be expensive, but you can find a new supplier. Well, when a disruption happens, you can imagine that you and your competitors are all searching for new suppliers. So it's a race. If you have done your intelligence before and gathered that information, that intelligence beforehand, where are the suppliers? What are their capacity? What are their capabilities? If you gather this information way before a disruption happens, when a disruption happens, you can go immediately to these suppliers. So you need to gather intelligence way before. Create smart redundancies. So I used to own I'm going to try to explain what a redundancy is. I used to own a Lenovo laptop, and I spilled coffee on it one day, and nothing happened to it. I was freaking out. Oh my God, the laptop will burn and all that stuff. Nothing happened to it. And then I asked a friend of mine who's in IT, and I said, "Why?" I was very impressed. I've spilled coffee and nothing happened. And he said, "Yeah, normal, because Lenovo is running like 6 different processes that are doing the same thing, concurrently. So if your coffee spilled and killed 3 of these processes, there is 3 other processors or processes that is running and doing the same thing. So your computer continues doing the same thing, working fine." We need to build that type of thing in supply chains. So what's a redundancy? For example, if I need a supplier to make this tie, let's say I need a silk supplier, I need another silk supplier as a backup, right? So if this supplier goes down, I can go to the next supplier. Obviously, this is easier said than done, because you need to manage these relationships. You need to allocate production or buying power to each of these suppliers. So it's not an easy, straightforward deal. But that's the idea of smart redundancy. Find redundant capacity, for example. That's just going to sit there. Maybe you don't need it immediately. So investing in some capacity that you don't need immediately is not a good business decision usually for a lot of CEOs. So you need to justify it. It's part of the risk management strategy. So if you obviously don't have a risk management strategy, it's going to be very hard to justify these investments to your top management. Invest in robust technologies. So just like the Lenovo example, robust technologies basically means that if something goes down, there's a backup for it. There's another process, redundant process or something that can continue working. And build financial strength, just like any individual who tries to build some savings so that if you, God forbid, get laid off and lose your job, you tap into your savings until you find another job. You have some buffer. Same thing. Companies need to build financial strength, but you can't do that in a disrupted state. You need to start doing that now for your company. Those are, again, supply side proactive disruption strategies. On the demand side, what can we do? Well, the biggest thing we can do is demand sensing technology. So demand sensing technology includes artificial intelligence that actually scrapes the web, looks at Twitter, looks at a lot of different like hotel reservations, airline reservations, and creates a very short-term forecast, but basically gives you 1 or 2 weeks to react. There's a company in Canada, I forgot the name, but it's started by a medical doctor years ago. And this company is a artificial intelligence company. What they do is their software basically monitors hotel reservations, airline ticketing, and several other things online that are publicly available online, and looks at differences in them, so try to sense the differences in them. This company actually saw COVID-19 coming 2 weeks before we started actually, around the world, we started locking down things. 2 weeks before China started locking down things in Wuhan, they already actually saw that coming. And how? Demand sensing. So they saw that travel in Wuhan area went down, hotel reservations went down, whatever other things they are tracking, those things told them something is going on. So with artificial intelligence, we can actually sense and see demand changes coming. The other technology that we will need is, excuse me, is Internet of Things. Internet of Things is basically sensors talking to computers, sensors talking to sensors. So if we have sensors in our products, in our refrigerators, in our manufacturing facilities, and these sensors talk to each other, we can actually see demand changes coming. So demand sensing is the biggest topic these days in the industry. Build market strength and build diversity. So diversity means basically don't focus on one market alone. And I don't necessarily mean geographically. I also mean product-wise. So if you're only selling ties in China, you're actually putting all your eggs in one basket. So if you're into the Chinese market, then maybe in addition to a tie, I don't know, start selling belts. Diversify your product portfolio, but also expand to new markets, because most of the times disruptions are localized. COVID-19 is an exception. That's why we call it a Black Swan event. It's like a 100-year flood. It's not going to happen as frequently as flooding in Southeast Asia because of the monsoons, or earthquakes in Turkey and Iran because those countries sit in 3 different fault lines, or earthquakes in the Indian Ocean, in the Ring of Fire. We know those spots, so they're exposed to those risks and they're frequent. We understand that, but nothing like the COVID-19 that actually covers the whole globe, impacts everywhere in the globe, happens that frequently. So diversification and building market strength basically should protect you from many different disruptions. Well, this concludes my short presentation on supply chain resilience. I'm really grateful for your interest and for your time, for being here with us. If you have any questions, I can answer them. And if you can answer them right now, today, please email me. My email is on the slide. Please email me and I will try to get back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Altay, for such an insightful presentation. Just wanted to remind our guests, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the page, and I'm happy to ask those questions for Professor Altay to answer. We do have one question here. What can companies do to prevent supply chain fraud during the pandemic when they're scrambling to keep their business going?
That's a very interesting question, because just 2 days ago, I was talking to a friend of mine who's in e-trade. He runs a fulfillment center in Turkey. And two topics came up in our conversation. One of them is fraud, and the other one is companies sitting on their payments. So in other words, because they cannot see the future clearly, they're uncertain about their future. Even though the fulfillment center has shipped their products, they were not able to collect the money from their customers. So I think both of those problems, the problem of collecting receivables as well as fraud, comes down to trust in the supply chain. Working with people and investing into these people before the fraud, before the disruption happens. If you're sensing fraud happening, then you stay away from that supplier or from that customer. But I think it should be more of a proactive strategy rather than a reactive strategy. In case of fraud, for example, the reaction is basically you go to the legal route and either sue them or not. But whether you can collect the money after you sue or you sue the company or not, they're all question marks. You can prevent all this by selecting your suppliers and your customers carefully, and also there are risk management strategies that you can look at. For example, there is insurance, disruption insurance, fraud insurance, so you can protect yourself and your company that way.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any other questions if you'd like to use the Q&A feature? If there are not, I know that Professor Altay did share his email and is happy to answer any questions after the event. Oh, looks like we got another one here. Is the healthcare PPE supply chain different than other supply chains in any significant way?
Not that I know of. The protective equipment supply chain is similar to other textile or garments supply chains. Because the protective equipment, the gowns, face masks, and all that stuff they don't have a fashion, as far as I know. So there is the design side of it, at least, is much shorter. But here's the problem with the PPE. Stuff like, surgical masks, PPEs, ventilators, these were items that are only sold to hospitals. So I know in Asia that, because of the SARS experience, a lot of Asian people wear masks when they're on the streets or when they're traveling in the airplanes. But on the Western world or Europe or whatever, it wasn't a thing. So when we talked about protective equipment or face masks, the demand was only for hospitals. So if a hospital buys 100 or 200 PPEs and and 500 masks or 1,000 masks, now imagine that millions of people are looking for face masks. They're looking for facial shields. They're not necessarily wearing hospital gowns and all that stuff. So the demand really shoot up. So it's not a 10%, 20% increase. It actually multiplied, 3 times, 4 times. And that's the problem that we are having in the PPE, ventilators, face masks, supply chains. So the PPE industry or the PPE supply chain is not really particularly different than any other supply chains. The basic logic is the same. Demand equals supply. We match demand and supply, but then suddenly demand went up and supply needs to keep up with it. That's why you see now fashion companies, like Valentino's and Gucci's and all that stuff, making face masks and making PPEs because we need that extra capacity. The capacity simply doesn't exist in the supply chain. Effie, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Apologize. Thank you for that. We have a few more questions here. How can we apply this into individual family life with proactive supply chain mindset with a lot of out of control environment?
That's a great question because when I'm teaching supply chain disruptions, I actually give a lot of examples from individual life, family life, because it's easier to relate to those things. If you have never been in a manufacturing plant, me talking about manufacturing technology may not make sense to you. So I appreciate that question because I think a lot of the knowledge we gain from supply chain management, we can move and find parallels in our family life. So how can we build resilience in our own lives? One thing I mentioned was financial strength. Save money, put it aside. It's easy to say, obviously, if you have a some income that you can save, you're making choices of, should I go to Paris with this money as a vacation, or should I, do staycation, stay at home, or go to the local beach, or go to the, my uncle's place for vacation so that I can save that money. So those are decisions that you need to make, and you don't have to be very stingy, but you should put money aside continuously. Let's say 10% of your income continuously for a rainy day. So that that rainy day eventually will come. In anybody's life, there are many rainy days, unfortunately. So you will be at least financially ready. In cultures like the Asian cultures or Middle Eastern cultures, I'm Turkish, you will see a lot of people, actually families coming together and cousins helping cousins or uncles helping aunts and stuff like that. That's part of resilience. You know, we in close-knit cultures, we have more resilience because we help family and friends. The Western cultures, like the United States, for example, is more individualistic. Obviously, there are exceptions to these rules, right? These are generalizations. But it's more individualistic, so people try to stand up by themselves, which is difficult in these times. So build your relationships with your family members, your friends, build your financial strength. But more importantly, I think we mentioned earlier that, you know, companies need to diversify. We as individuals need to diversify. So during status quo times, when there is nothing going on, like after COVID-19 is over, invest in yourself. Look for ways that you can actually learn new stuff. Look for ways that you can create side income, so that if one income disappears, you have at least another income. Diversify your income sources. How can I do that? Well, maybe you're an accountant and you work as an accountant in a company. If the company goes down, you're laid off, you will look for a job. In the meantime, maybe you're just selling, you know, I don't know, whatever your hobby is. Maybe you're painting and you're selling your paintings. Maybe you're making, you know, at home you're knitting and you're selling your knittings. Maybe you're buying and selling used cars. Whatever your interest is, do something that you're interested in, like, you know, monetize your hobby, for example. That's a classic strategy. Create multiple income streams, consult, or learn teach, or learn coding. So a lot of us during non-crisis times are very relaxed and we're enjoying life. We only think about these things when a crisis hits. A crisis hits our country or our business, our job, or ourselves. Unfortunately, that's human nature. But you need to force yourself, just like people force themselves, you know, to exercise. My daughter was complaining last night because she needed to exercise, and she was like, "I'm too tired. I don't want to exercise." And I said, you know, no pain, no gain. You have to exercise so that you are healthier, you know, tomorrow. So same thing applies to human life, to our lives. We need to think about, you know, building resilience now. Now meaning not in the middle of COVID-19, but, you know, during normal times, so that we are prepared for the crisis. For example, in Turkey, we're prone to earthquakes. So everyone I know in Turkey, in the trunk of their cars, has an earthquake kit. What is an earthquake kit? There's a 10-gallon jug of water that they refresh every couple of weeks. There is batteries. There are batteries. There are flashlights. There are blankets. There's shortwave radio. They keep them in the trunk of their cars. So if in the middle of the night they have to evacuate their houses because of an earthquake, they can run to the car, or the next morning they can go to the car and they can pick up stuff. So, that's a strategy to deal with specifically with earthquakes. So there are a lot of things you can do, but you need to think about them now so that you can prepare yourself for the next pandemic or next epidemic or the next disaster.
Thank you. We have time for just a couple more questions here. Are there any drawbacks on those strategies you presented that we should watch out for?
The biggest drawback is to justify the investments when there is nothing going on, when there is no disaster or there is no disruption. I just mentioned, for example, that people have earthquake kits in their trunks in Turkey. Well, you need to buy those blankets, you need to buy those batteries, and then those batteries will go obsolete, or the water in your jug will go stale. So you need to replenish them. Well, if you think about it from a business perspective, if this was a business doing this, that water, those batteries, those blankets, they're all inventory sitting in a distribution center or multiple distribution centers or warehouses, and inventory is cost. A lot of companies are actually trying to reduce inventory levels. That's why, for example, lean supply chain management strategies are so important. We're trying to reduce inventory levels, be lean, and now you're coming out and saying to your top management, no, I want to increase the inventory levels because we need redundancy or we need protection. The justification of that is difficult because you need to be able to calculate the risk, and you evaluate that risk, basically translate that risk into dollar figures, and then compare the inventory spending you will have to absorb or you will have to increase. And if these two are justified, then you can sell that idea. So I think the downside is just number one, justifying, and number two, finding the financials to justify that. So it's easy for me to say that you need to buy more blankets and put them in your car, but if you work, if you earn your living paycheck to paycheck, and you have no additional money that you can put aside, it doesn't make sense to buy blankets and put it in your car that maybe you will never use. So the downsides is the financial risk you're taking, and also the justification of these strategies to your upper management. The classic example we give is company management usually, or even governments, are usually short-sighted. They're myopic decision makers. So, for example, a politician, let me give you the example of Chicago mayor. I love Mayor Lightfoot, our mayor, but if I'm the mayor of Chicago and I'm thinking about re-election, does it make sense to invest into a flood that may ruin Chicago, which may never happen, or invest the money that I have, the budget I have, into fixing the potholes on the roads that Chicagoans experience every day, with their cars and trying to swipe around potholes? Which one of these investments will bring you votes to get reelected? The potholes. Nobody cares for something that they don't see, right? So as a result of that, governments, politicians, companies, they tend to fix the immediate problem rather than investing into a long-term problem that may or may not happen. And those are the downsides. Myopic decision-making, financial means, having the financial means to be able to do those investments and justifying those investments.
Great, thank you. We have just time for a couple more questions here. How long do you think it will take for the global travel industry to recover to the point before COVID-19 took place?
Another really good question. I'm not a futurist. I can't make those forecasts, and unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball. So it's very hard to tell us to give us or to give you a time frame saying like 3 months, 6 months, a year. However, I do have several friends in the travel industry. One of them is a director at the United Airlines. Another one is at American Airlines. Another one is a travel agent in Turkey. And talking to them and reading, what I'm sensing is they're all expecting a new normal within the travel industry, meaning when these lockdowns are opening up, they're not expecting the travel industry to come back to the level where it used to be. They're expecting actually something somewhere lower, meaning a lot of people will be hesitant to travel. A lot of people are, very anxious to travel because they don't believe in COVID-19, or they don't think it's as big as it's exaggerated. So, for example, young people, they think like it's a old people's problem. So a lot of people are anxious to travel, but unfortunately, that's not 100% of the market. That's still about 30-40% of the market. The rest of the market, are people that are cautious. They're thinking that, you know what, before maybe I should cancel my summer vacation this summer, or I was going to go skiing in December, but maybe I'll go next year. So I think a lot of people, that's my sense from talking and reading, a lot of people are postponing their travel plans, their vacation plans, and putting them to next year. So that means until at least next summer, summer of 2021 or December of 2021, we're not going to see the travel industry and tourism come back in its healthy form. That's my guesstimate.
Thank you. And we have one last question here. Would lean inventory need to be revisited? It showed in this pandemic.
Yes, that's something that we also discuss in academia, because for a lot of years, because of Toyota production system, we have been teaching in business schools lean business management, reducing inventory levels, cutting down on bureaucracy, becoming lean and streamlined. Those were the buzzwords. And supply chain disruption literature, however, separately from this literature, has been talking about agility. And if you think about the two, the difference is, I hope you like dogs, because I'm going to give a dog example. Lean is a greyhound. Basically, it's a race dog that runs around chasing a mechanical rabbit. Lean does this very, very well. And if you think about a greyhound, it's a very lean dog. It's built for speed, but it's built to do one thing very, very good. And agile is an Australian Shepherd dog. So that dog can go under things, jump over things, climb things, run fast. It's very, very flexible. But one thing that we confuse are these are not mutually exclusive things. Agile actually involves lean in it, because the Australian Shepherd dog, look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it. The Australian Shepherd dog is not a bulky, fat dog. It's very fast. It's not faster than a greyhound, but it's very fast. But unlike a greyhound, it can do different things very quickly. So the Australian Shepherd dog is a lean dog, but it's a dog that can do other things. So I would not put away lean completely. But companies that have been focusing on lean have been focusing on doing one thing really, really well. And what they need to do now, in addition to lean, they need to find other ways of doing things and create a portfolio and be able to switch in this portfolio, from one thing to another thing very, very quickly. Now, immediately people think about technologies to be able to do that. But I think before technology, you need to invest in your human resources, invest in your employees, because if your employees in here are not flexible, the technology will not help. The typical example is, if you don't know how to do math, and if I give you a calculator, you still don't know how to do math. So the technology is the calculator, but I need to change the mindset first. And we need to invest in our people to create that adaptable culture, that adaptability, that flexibility in terms of our company culture, and then invest into technologies that will allow us to do those flexibilities. So I would argue that lean companies have the ability to become agile companies, because lean is part of agile. It's agile absorbs lean. And that's one way of building resilience. But remember, agility is a reactive strategy in terms of supply chain disruption management. You still want to be proactive to prepare yourself for the next pandemic.
Thank you so much, Professor Altay, for your presentation and for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to our Associate Provost for Global Engagement and Online Learning, John Mario Besana, to give us some closing remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Effie, and thank you, Nezih. Good evening, everyone. It is very exciting to connect with all of you who are among our many alumni across Asia, China, and India, in particular during this time of pandemic. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this evening to learn something new, we hope, about supply chain and how some of those principles apply to our daily lives as well. As you heard earlier at the beginning from our president, Dr. Esteban, DePaul faced the COVID emergency with great energy and agility, almost like an Australian shepherd dog, if I can use Nezih's image, by moving all of our instruction online in mid-March. DePaul has actually a long history of quality, successful online learning that started back in 2000. But you may find it interesting and a little bit curious to know that the first person who ever graduated from DePaul, having taken all of his classes in a remote format, did so in 1958, 5-8. Obviously not via internet, but with a phone connection. And there's an interesting article on the DePaul Newsline today, if you Google it and go find it. Quite an interesting story. So even in these strange times of stay-at-home orders around the world, DePaul continues to deliver the same quality education that you received on our campus. And we will continue to do so in the fall. All of our incoming international students can, if they want, start their degrees online in fall 2020 and then come to Chicago later, we hope, in January 2021. So please, if you have friends or relatives who are considering doing what you did and join our learning community at DePaul, please reassure them that we are ready for them with multiple options for their success and some special tuition arrangements as well. So we hope that you will continue to stay engaged with us, and thank you very much to all of you who have already indicated your wish to stay connected with DePaul when you registered for this webinar. We can always use your help. You are our best ambassadors in your own country and even more so in your local communities. There are many ways for you to stay engaged. I'm going to give you a few suggestions, but I'm sure that your creativity can come up with a few more. You could provide career advice to our current international students. Go back to when you were graduating from DePaul, facing your first job search. It would have been interesting and nice and productive to have a former graduate student or undergraduate student who's now an alumnus with a job somewhere around the world helping you and giving you advice. So if you're interested in doing so, get in touch with us. We can help you connect with some of our current students. You can hire some of our students as interns during breaks, or more importantly, facilitate their hiring as new graduates. You can identify DePaul alumni in your company or in your local community through LinkedIn, through WeChat, through other social media platforms, and help us organize local events for alumni. You can host informal info sessions or small events for prospective or newly admitted students. Again, if you're interested in doing so, get in touch with us. Some of my team will be happy to connect with you and help you organize local events. And then why not reconnect with your favorite faculty or staff at DePaul via email, via LinkedIn, and any other channel that you might find suitable for your current lifestyle. And please be sure to visit the DePaul Alumni Relations website. You can just Google DePaul Alumni Relations for more information on upcoming events and on university updates. It's ironic, but the pandemic has made us all become Zoom experts and virtual synchronous connection experts, which had made us easier to stay in touch with you guys across the world. We are really counting on you as our global ambassadors. So thank you again for being with us this evening, and please stay safe.